Good evening. My name is Heather Murrin, and on behalf of the Johns Hopkins University Board of Trustees, and as co-chair of the Rising to the Challenge, the campaign for Johns Hopkins, I'd like to welcome you here this evening for this evening's conversation. We're very happy that you're here. We're here to introduce some essential ideas behind Rising to the Challenge, highlight one of our campaign priorities, and celebrate some of the many thousands of people who have already stepped forward to ensure the campaign's success. There is some light reading for you following tonight's discussions. There are 2 brochures and the Hopkins Gazette, which is available on the tables outside. And I would in fact encourage you to take them and to read through them. I always discover something new and different when I have an opportunity to read through some of our materials, something that inspires me further or makes me want to go back to school and learn something different, or simply to be amazed by the breadth of the work that we do. And I would like to, however, offer you the short version or the executive summary of some of the topics that you'll find in that reading. 1, Rising to the Challenge is the largest and most ambitious Johns Hopkins campaign yet, seeking to raise $4.5 billion, which is a goal that is worthy of Johns Hopkins. The campaign is transformational, both in the exciting challenges that we have set for ourselves and also for the new cross-disciplinary approach that we are taking that these challenges demand. And it focuses on people, on supporting our excellent faculty members, clinicians, students, who with your help will achieve the vision that the campaign embodies on our campuses, in our communities, and around the world. Tonight, you will have a chance to speak with 2 of our faculty members about one of our major campaign priorities, the Johns Hopkins Institute for the American City. Katherine Newman, the James Knapp Dean of the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences, and David Andrews, Dean of the School of Education, are both leaders in their respective fields. They, together with faculty members in all of our schools, engineering, nursing, public health, business, the Peabody Institute, and the Center for Talented Youth, as well as the Sheridan Libraries, are coming together as passionate exponents of the Institute and of the possibility that it holds. I do share their passion. I graduated from the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences in 1988. That possibility was actually only available to me because of the generosity of someone who funded scholarships, and I was a scholarship student. In addition, my parents, my grandparents, and my extended family have been treated within the Johns Hopkins medical system over the years. And I am newly a parent of a freshman at Johns Hopkins at the Krieger School. So my love for Hopkins and all of the schools and all of the campuses is profound. And having grown up in Baltimore and spent time on the campus as a student and now as a volunteer and as a trustee and as a parent, I have a real affection and a sense of concern for the city that several of our programs call home. The idea that our university can take a leading role in revitalizing American cities, starting with Baltimore and then sharing that knowledge with other cities, including this one, is a source of great excitement and great pride. The very notion that a university can and should make a difference in the face of our urban infrastructure, health, education, employment, nutrition, and behavioral problems is audacious, and audacious is exactly what we expect Hopkins to be. From its beginning, Johns Hopkins has been remarkably skillful in knitting together different disciplines needed to find innovative solutions to the most complex problems. As all of us here can appreciate, there are a few key ingredients that will allow such innovations to take flight. First, brilliant and committed people. Second, the ideas that they develop and test in collaboration with one another across disciplines. And third, and this is where we can come in, the funding for those ideas, particularly the most original and the most exciting. At Johns Hopkins, traditional revenue streams, research funding, and tuition dollars, for example, help fund programs. But when we are looking for breakthrough innovation, philanthropy is indispensable. Philanthropy has the power to reshape the way a university does business. It allows students, faculty, and clinicians to tackle the most demanding challenges, ones that cannot be met by one individual, one discipline, or even one institution working alone. It inspires the risk-taking discovery of researchers and educators, and it supports their capacity to translate these ideas into action. Simply put, philanthropy can change the state of play, as we're about to discover. All of us in this room have the ability to help enable and advance the work that we're about to discuss. Inspired and informed by our speakers, we can provide the third ingredient that will make their ideas a reality. To all of you here with us in Boston, and to those of you joining our conversation online, please share your thoughts and perspectives, and be sure to ask tough questions. Please don't ask me the tough questions, but there are many people here who can help. By offering your feedback and ideas, with your continued advocacy and support, you will help the people of Johns Hopkins meet the challenges of today that affect us all. And now, before we meet Dean Newman and Dean Andrews, let's take a look at the challenges American cities face today and our vision for transforming our cities through the Institute.
For the first time ever, half of the global population lives in urban areas, a milestone America reached more than 100 years ago, driven by the Industrial Revolution. However, since the 1950s, we have seen many of our cities suffer. Looking at Baltimore as an example, booms in commerce and the arts have in large part been superseded by economic decline, high violent crime rates, and class stratification. A loss of manufacturing jobs also fueled urban flight from the city, which has lost 1/3 of its population, and the viability of remaining employment opportunities depends on other uncertain resources, like transportation, education, nutritious food, and neighborhood and housing stability. Today, approximately 40,000 Baltimore homes have been abandoned, and the poverty rate stands at 19.2%. And Baltimore is not alone, as other northeastern and midwestern Rust Belt cities face similar challenges. For example, Philadelphia and Detroit's poverty rates are about 28% and 36% respectively. Baltimore is also not alone because Johns Hopkins realizes we're not just located in Baltimore, we are of Baltimore. As noted by the university's first president, Daniel Coit Gilman, the future of our institution is inextricably intertwined with that of the city in which we were founded. Our commitment is evident. We are already creating an innovative youth educational complex in East Baltimore and providing clinical services to the underinsured through our Urban Health Institute, and we convened a national summit on reducing gun violence. And through the new Johns Hopkins Institute for the American City, we will continue to work with civic and community groups to reinvigorate the local economy, improve education, health, and the environment, confront racial and class divides, and boost cultural collaborations that help lead people back to the city. And we'll share knowledge, helping other cities apply what we learn here and learning what works for them. This institute will be one of the most multidisciplinary endeavors in our university's history, merging our expertise in business, medicine, nursing, public health and education, along with music and the arts, the humanities and engineering. We know the stakes are high, but our combined efforts will serve not only to envision a better life for city residents, but help bring it to fruition in Baltimore and across the United States.
Good evening, everyone. Isn't that great? I'm Katherine Newman, Dean of the Arts and Sciences, and it is a pleasure to see all of you here tonight, and to all of our friends who are in the online audience, we welcome you as well. David and I are here to talk to you about what we think will be one of the most innovative parts of the new campaign, the Institute for the American City. And as the film introduced you to the idea, it makes it clear that Johns Hopkins is rooted in Baltimore and intends to bend itself toward the solution to the city's problems. We're looking to build an institute that can develop this kind of capacity to link ourselves both across the university, to join the research together from all of our different schools, and to link us to the city, to the nonprofit institutes within it, to city government, to all of the different agencies and elements of the private sector that have to come together in order to create solutions to the problems of the older industrial city. Let me just spend a minute talking to you about how those problems emerged in the first place. This is the academic part of what I get to do, because I'm an inveterate teacher. If we think about the history of American cities in the last century, what we realize is that from the Second World War until the 1960s, cities were the heartland of industrial America. We think about Detroit, we think about our own city of Baltimore, we think about Flint. These were the major places where the auto companies and the steel industries were all centered. And they were the places where good jobs could be found for people with relatively limited education, because these were the jobs that fueled the great American dominance in industry. But that began to come to a close, unfortunately, and between 1970 and 1990, we saw a whole series of demographic shifts occur across the cities of the Northeast. We start to see depopulation. The film mentioned that Baltimore has lost about a third of its population. Baltimore is not unusual. Detroit lost even more. Syracuse, Flint, all of those cities began to lose their populations as the jobs that sustained them moved out of the city. So this is a period of 20 years of deindustrialization as those factories moved either south or offshore altogether, taking the jobs with them that had once sustained the American, in a sense, blue-collar middle class. Something interesting happened in the last decade of that century, 1990 to 2000. We started to see some cities begin to revive. Boston is a good example. You started to see gentrification, people moving back into the city, and poverty started to move to the outer rings of the cities, into the suburban areas. So we've seen a big spike in suburban inner ring suburbs where a lot of the poor migrated as the cities became more affluent. So in the last decade or so, from 2000 to 2010, these American cities begin to divide. We've got cities like Providence, Boston, that began this revival, and we've got cities that are stuck, and Baltimore is one of those. And we cannot abandon these older industrial cities. There are too many people in them. The territory they occupy is too important. We need to bend our energies to restoring the great American cities that were once our industrial paradise. So Baltimore, of course, here we are. This is just one, but when we look at how the map of the United States is populated with these cities, we find they're everywhere. From Oakland, California, near where I grew up, to Detroit, to Flint, to Syracuse up north in New York, to Providence, all over the United States, we have these deindustrialized cities that require new solutions. In Baltimore, what are the symptoms of these problems? As the film mentioned, very high poverty rates, high rates of single-parent households, which are almost always doomed to poverty. Abandoned housing, we have something like 40,000 properties in Baltimore that are empty, boarded up, attracting crime because these are now becoming emptied neighborhoods. So that public safety issue is a very serious one. It retards middle-class families moving back into the city. It costs an enormous amount to police. It sends children into downward spirals of danger. All the way around, the crime problem tends to occupy itself in cities with these vacuums. And finally, and most tragically for the older industrial cities, as people move out and as industry moves out, the tax base erodes. That causes the tax rates to go up because there's nothing left to tax, and that then, of course, retards the interest of new families in moving back into the city. This is the constellation of problems that Baltimore has experienced. So what are we going to do about it? Well, the first thing you need to remember is we are of Baltimore. Johns Hopkins is not going anywhere. We are not going to offshore ourselves. As the city goes, so goes Johns Hopkins. And that's why we are so committed to the revival of this city. And I have to say that that's one of the reasons why I took this job and feel so privileged to have it. President Daniels has committed himself and committed the institution to being part of the solution for the city of Baltimore. And that's where my heart lies as well. So what will the Institute for the American City do? It is a think of it as a sort of super action-oriented think tank that's going to draw together the research expertise that we have in all of our different schools to attack a series of problems, not only on behalf of Baltimore, but on behalf as a almost conveyor belt of solutions for the older industrial cities, many of which don't have research institutes like the ones we have at Johns Hopkins. So, for example, I was in Flint, Michigan a few weeks ago talking to major foundation leaders there. Flint was one of the great industrial cities of the US. And they said to me, you know, could we be part of the Institute for the American City? Because we don't have a research university here. And if you develop solutions to these kinds of problems, we could benefit from what you've learned. You could export your solutions to us. And I thought, what a great idea. We'll build a network of these older industrial cities. So what kinds of problems can this institute attack? Let me take one example, childhood obesity. Why is childhood obesity a problem? Of the many things we could worry about, why do you think we should worry about childhood obesity? You're nodding at me. What do you think? Well, we got to have a microphone. You got a microphone?
I can talk loud.
They're recording and we've got an online audience, so let's have a microphone up here. Why do we need to worry about childhood obesity?
How's this, okay?
Perfect.
Because if you're poor, you have to be very careful about what you spend your money on, and food is a big item, and you're going to buy food that's less expensive, that will go farther. And what are the foods that are less expensive and go farther? The things that contribute to childhood obesity, like pastas and sugar.
Canned goods.
Canned goods, exactly.
Exactly right.
A lot of salt, a lot of sugar, lots of processed
food. And
food.
if you are an obese child, what does that mean for your health over time? What's going to happen to you as you get older? Anybody out there? Diabetes. Diabetes is a very serious problem in the United States, and if it begins in childhood, it's even more serious. So the problem of childhood obesity is one that has these huge knock-on consequences. It has health consequences. It has consequences for kids in school. What happens to kids who are overweight in school? They're teased, they don't feel happy, they're not engaged in the classroom, they're subject to all kinds of shaming. So the problem of childhood obesity has an enormous number of consequences. But what's the cause? Why do we see kids who are overweight? And why are they likely to be poor? Well, there are lots of competing theories, and Johns Hopkins is one of the places where those competing theories are being sorted out. In the School of Public Health, we have an NIH-supported Institute for the Study of Child Obesity, and it is looking at the different contributing factors to obesity. For example, is it because of taxes on food, which then will shift the cost of food upward and make it very difficult for people to make healthy food selections? So is it about the cost of food? Is it about the availability of healthy food? If you live in a poor neighborhood, you don't have Whole Foods next door. You have small bodegas. They charge very high prices. You're likely to see canned goods with high salt and high fat content. And it's going to be displayed in a way that's going to attract your attention, all that bad food. And that's going to lead to epidemics of obesity. So food deserts, costs of food. What about exercise? If you're in a poor urban school, the likelihood is you're in a school that's losing recess, that doesn't have the facilities to keep you active. And anybody who's ever tried to work with little kids who are not being given the time to just run around like little tornadoes knows that kids can't concentrate if they're in schools that can no longer afford to offer them opportunities for exercise. So all of these contributing factors make a difference. Which ones are most powerful? This is what the Institute for the American City is going to ask. If you only had $10 to spend on a new policy to address childhood obesity, where would you get the biggest bang for the buck? Would you get it by giving people coupons that they could spend on healthy food in a green market? Would you get it by building a new playground? Would you get it by adding a teacher who can supervise a PE class? These are all options, and they each cost. Which ones will have the greatest bang for the buck we invest in attacking the problem of childhood obesity? And if we learn that solution through our research in the School of Public Health, how do we get the city to adopt that solution? And if we can test it through a gold standard of research in which we assign people to a condition and a control, and we look and can prove that this intervention made a difference, how do we then take that experiment, an experiment sponsored by the Institute for the American City, and broadcast it so that it can be taken to scale throughout the city? And if we can crack the problem of childhood obesity in Baltimore, can we help Flint do the same? Can we help Syracuse do the same? Can we become a leader for solutions to problems like childhood obesity? And that, of course, is just one. High school dropout prevention. In Dean Andrews' school, we have some of the leading researchers studying the problem of high school dropouts. And they have predictive models that tell us what, in a sense, the symptoms of potential future high school dropouts look like. Attendance patterns as early as 6th grade. There are signals that children are sending out of disengagement that will end up in high school dropouts to a higher probability. And if that's the case, and we can find those kids and we can encourage them, incentivize them, engage their parents in ways that will prevent them from dropping out, we may well arrest a pathway to poverty. Workforce training. This is something that is extremely important to me as a researcher who studied urban poverty most of my career. I'm very interested in what we could do to revive the tradition of apprenticeship that was so successful up until the Second World War, and that today fuels the extraordinary skill that you see, for example, in the German labor force, in which young people are incentivized and rewarded for moving back and forth between private firms that train them and schools where they're learning. And that kind of apprenticeship program, which is the dominant model of industrial training in Germany, is the reason, one of the big reasons, why the Germans are the leading high-skilled manufacturing labor force in the world. Well, why not Baltimore? Why can't we bring that kind of model back to Baltimore? I'm working with the German-American Chamber of Commerce to bring something called the German Skills Initiative to Baltimore through the Institute for the American City, where we are asking that German subsidiaries used to this kind of workforce training develop a similar or parallel kind of apprenticeship model for the young people of the city of Baltimore. If you meet a German kid who's 16 years old and who doesn't have huge ambitions to go on to college at that moment, and you see them, as I saw them this summer, in a steel mill, they're earning $1,200 a month at the age of 16, becoming skilled craftsmen who are working in the high-tech end of the steel industry. I would love to see Baltimore's young men have that opportunity. It would mean the world to them if they could. Now, these are the academic and research elements which we hope to engage the city itself, the state, the nonprofits and social service agencies. But what are we going to do for our own students? After all, many of you are parents of the students in my school, or you're alumni from your undergraduate days. We have given birth to a new degree program called Social Policy. The Social Policy program combines economics, sociology, and political science. Students major in those fields, and then they enter an integrated set of courses entirely to examine this kind of social problems literature. They learn how economists evaluate things like workforce training. They learn how sociologists think about the organization of poverty and in households. They take those insights. They spend a year or a semester in Washington or a semester in Baltimore doing internships as well as rigorous courses in social policy. So we've given this a face, an academic face, as well as a research face, because we want, in all of the initiatives we're experimenting with in this campaign, to go all the way from the core of the research mission to the youngest students in our midst and make sure that they too are prepared to be leaders in these fields. So we're going to build these partnerships through the Institute for the American City. It will be an engine of social change. It will be a rigorously evaluated set of research problems, and we think it's going to become a model for the way universities move from being cities on a hill to part of the cities in which they're located. There's one other little piece I want to share with you. How many of you know what this building represents? The Parkway Theater. Does anybody remember the Parkway? Tell us, what is the Parkway back there?
I don't remember.
Don't remember. Does anybody remember the Parkway? I would be surprised, actually, if any of you did, because it was a decrepit building even when you were students there.
It's going to be,
It's okay. It's at the intersection of North Avenue and North Charles. It was built in 1915. I'll let you out of your dilemma out there. It was built in 1915 as a silent movie theater. And it was let go into rack and ruin sometime in the late 1960s. We have been given this building now by the city in cooperation with the Maryland Film Festival and with MICA, our fantastic art school. And we are combining forces with them to build a new theater that's going to be restored to its ancient glory, and it is going to be stunning. This is going to be the restoration task of a lifetime for some lucky person who gets to rebuild this dowager queen of a theater, and we are locating our film program in that intersection. We have two buildings, the Parkway and another building on the other side of the street. We're conjoining ourselves with MICA. We are going to have our own films, our students' films, our faculty's films, broadcast, so to speak, from there. We're having film classes there. We're building an integrated undergraduate program and a graduate program in film production. We think we can change the character of that intersection. It's a pretty tough intersection right now. It needs some redevelopment. We think this will be the beginning of a movement up North Charles from the train station all the way up to Homewood of redevelopment, of new investment, of economic invigoration. So the Institute for the American City isn't just about social problems. It's about forward thinking. It's about how we move forward into a next economy. And none of those cities that we looked at before on this map, none of them that have actually turned around have been able to do that without a strong backbone in the arts and culture, because that's what brings high-end consumers back into the city, and we're hoping that Parkway Theater is going to become a catalyst for a whole new Station North arts neighborhood, and Johns Hopkins will be helping to lead the way. Now, of course, the schools are absolutely central to this, and I'm going to turn this over to David Andrews, but not before I point out, if you get a chance to look at our new magazine, which I'm very proud of, I think it's absolutely gorgeous, you will see an article about the students in the Krieger School who are moving from us at the end of their senior year to the School of Education, where they are receiving a master's degree at the end of a year, supported by the school, while they work in the Henderson Hopkins School, which David will tell you about. This is just one example of the integration within the university, passing through the Institute for the American City, where we hope we're going to see that we're all bigger than the sum of our parts. David.
Great. Well, thank you, Katherine.
Thank you.
I think, as you can see from Katherine's remarks, that these are complex issues that we're dealing with that are facing our American cities. And one component of that is the condition of our schools, especially our urban schools, and the role that they play in potentially revitalizing our communities. But this first graphic here is just a demonstration that it's not just about schools. You know, as the Dean of the School of Education, I constantly have people coming up and say, if we could just fix those schools, it would all be better. It wouldn't all be better if we could just fix the schools. It would be better, but it wouldn't be fixed. And the reason is that if we could have the best school in a community possible, but if we don't focus on housing and healthy environments for people to live in, if we don't focus on the housing stock that's there, if we don't focus on jobs and workforce development, if there are not enough jobs, then we see this constant recycling of the population through these neighborhoods, and it doesn't matter how good the school is in a particular area. And I think we've seen that with Hopkins as an entity. What goes on around that entity changes dramatically unless we think of it as a holistic and integrated type of a problem. So when we think about integrating schools and high-quality schools into this interrelated challenge that we have, it's a major piece, but it's not the only piece. And so when you make a commitment to strengthening schools, we also make a commitment to strengthening the neighborhoods. And as you'll see in East Baltimore, we're paying as much attention to working with our colleagues across the university to strengthen our neighborhoods as we are to building a world-class school, because if we don't, we'll have a 200% turnover in that school every year, and we'll make absolutely no progress in moving the students through in terms of college readiness, and we'll make no progress in redeveloping the neighborhood. And for me, this is quite personal because I live in one of the neighborhoods. I get a kick out of the video that shows the neighborhoods in disrepair, and I feel like I'm at home. I see these, my wife and I renovated 2 row houses in a basically deserted block in East Baltimore, and we've lived there for 2 years. It's the neighborhood where we're building the school. So when I see these images of this, of row after, of block after block of empty houses and row homes, I get a chuckle out of it. It is coming back, but it's coming back slowly, and the schools play a major role. So when people ask me, you know, what makes effective schools, you don't want to get stuck with someone on an airplane and have them find out that you're the dean of a school of education, because everybody has a clear idea of how to fix schools. I've often wondered whether our cardiologists, you know, get that same type of advice about heart surgery when they're on the plane. I doubt it, but everyone thinks they know how to fix schools, and we actually do know a lot about highly effective schools. And many of you in this room probably went to schools, if not most of you went to schools that were relatively effective. Otherwise, you wouldn't have made it to Hopkins, you wouldn't have made it to where you are in your careers. And the 3 things that we focus on in highly effective schools are, first, teachers and leaders. It's about the people. Like in any industry, it's about people. We have some great teachers in this country. We have some great leaders. We just don't have enough. And we don't have them distributed in the areas where we need them the most. So if you look at the distribution of high quality and highly effective teachers, they aren't necessarily finding themselves in our most needy schools, and certainly not in our most challenged urban environments. They find themselves working in other parts of the education sector, and those that come into our urban environment don't stay very long. So sustaining that commitment of high-quality leaders and teachers and creating environments that will allow them to stay in those environments is essential. We also know it takes engaged families and students. You know, in a neighborhood where the conditions, the living conditions, are those of survival, it's very, very difficult for some of our families who are working 2 and 3 jobs and who are stressed out about everything from their finances to their safety, who don't know where they're going to be able to find a place in the community for their children to have adequate recreation. Those pressures contribute to their ability to engage their students in an educational setting and an educational endeavor that actually leads to positive outcomes. So we know we have to work on engaging families and students and making their lives much easier than they currently are, so that they can dedicate their efforts towards their academics. And the last thing, and it's one of the things I'm most excited about and leads into what we're doing in East Baltimore, is that we have this explosion of both technology and instructional practices that are becoming more and more evidence-based, based on randomized trials, looking at what works and what doesn't work in these settings, so that and it's not just what works and what doesn't work in education, it's what works and what doesn't work for individual students. And so we're much better able to profile students and provide them with the type of instruction and the type of experiences that are going to maximize their academic growth. We're very excited about the potential to finally move away from this one-to-many, teaching to the middle type of educational system that's existed for the last couple hundred years, basically. And we see some real promise in how we're going to do that. So the combination of using the most cutting-edge technology and research in one of the most challenged neighborhoods in all of in all of the country happens to be in East Baltimore, led us to this opportunity to build the Henderson Hopkins School. This is a $53 million project in one of the toughest neighborhoods in Baltimore. This is just north of the hospital. And when we started in this neighborhood, it was relatively empty, abandoned. We relocated residents over a 10-year period and are building them back and bringing them back into the neighborhood, some that lived there before, some that are middle income, some that are upper middle income. But in the heart of the neighborhood, we've anchored the redevelopment of this neighborhood, my neighborhood, on a 7-acre campus there that starts with infants at 6 weeks and serves students all the way up through the 8th grade. When we're finished, it will house 720 students. And one of the most interesting, I think, and exciting parts about the experiment is that we are dedicated to and fully committed to a mixed income population at the school. So we're controlling that by prioritizing who gets into the school. First of all, living in the neighborhood. Second, working in the neighborhood, and the neighborhood includes the Johns Hopkins Hospital as well as Kennedy Krieger Institute. So we're managing the population to create a mixed income opportunity for students who their parents work in the neighborhood, but also who work in the neighborhood and the families who live in the neighborhood. The density of poverty in some of these neighborhoods is so extreme that without paying attention to this complex composition of the residents and those who work in the neighborhood, we're not going to be able to make the progress that we need. So we are nearing completion of this facility. It opens January 2nd. At least the K-8 part opens January 2nd. We have had students in a temporary location. It's founded on the principle that we need to maximize growth for every individual student. There's a data platform that underlies the instructional practices. Teachers are looking at dashboards that are telling them which particular interventions and instructional practices are most effective for each individual student. We're doing parallel types of processes in medicine with our approach to individualized and personalized health. You see the exact same strategies emerging now in education. So in the very near future, the next couple of years, we expect that the schedules for every student will be changing on a weekly, if not a daily basis, and we'll be maximizing performance by moving students from large groups to small groups to individual computer-assisted instruction, all driven by dashboards. So it's a great activity. It's something that has drawn a lot of attention to both East Baltimore and Johns Hopkins University, and we're going to stop there and open it up for questions. This is a conversation, so it's your opportunity to jump in with questions and or comments.
I think we've got some. We need the microphones back there.
I think I have it.
Dean
Newman, you mentioned your experiences with Flint, Michigan, and how they don't have a program similar to this. I'm wondering if there are any cities in the country that do, where a university is leading sort of the comeback for a city, if this model has been tried or replicated elsewhere.
Many universities that find themselves in distressed neighborhoods, and a surprisingly large number of extremely well-respected universities are like that. Yale in New Haven, Harvard here. There are parts of Cambridge that are pretty depressed. It's not unusual. Brown University in Providence. Most of us care about the cities we're located in. What makes this special, I think, is our plan to integrate the city into the institute itself. So what tends to happen in most universities is a lot of research being done on the urban areas that surround them. I mean, they have sociologists, public health people, they all care about those cities. But we have a plan, for example, to create a sort of sabbatical system for people in the Department of Public Health to come and join us on campus, to join task forces on something like childhood obesity, to make the, if you will, the implementers part of the research process, to engage the nonprofit institutions in the research process itself, because if you don't have that kind of buy-in, then when it comes to gathering the resources and the political and social support for taking something to scale, you just don't have it. So we are not the only university that cares about the neighborhood that we're in. But I do think we have some unusual ideas that are attracting attention and hopefully will be important, again, to cities like Flint that have teaching institutions, but they don't have research institutions located there. Thanks. Next question.
Over here. In general, how do you deal with the teacher unions in these cities? And more specifically to the Henderson Hopkins School, is this considered a private school, a chartered school? Do you have a unionized teacher?
It's a formal charter school. It's a contract school. Contract because we have some special conditions around the lottery, the priorities of living and working there. But essentially all of the teachers are part of the public school system and are members of the union. You do have to be very diligent in both the selection of teachers and the feedback and process that you use for any type of corrective action. So we follow the same rules. And for Actually, there's two ways to look at it. One is you would have much more freedom without these regulations, but you also would have much more difficulty going to scale. So we want to be able to do this in a way that could be done in any city with any body of teachers that are part of the public school network. So you do have to be very careful and document and very diligent in the process to make sure that you're getting the kind of performance that you want out of teachers.
Yes.
Hi, this is a question for Dean Andrews. This comes from our live streaming audience. You've been asked to identify some of the challenges involved in implementing big data approaches to personalized education.
So lots of challenges for big data and personalized education. One is getting systems that talk to each other, data warehouses that are coming from, some are proprietary. So every student at Henderson Hopkins has an individual goal. We've worked with a company called Goalbook to put a front-end goal system in place. Data systems coming from very different places need to talk to each other in order to get an integrated profile so that you can conduct the analytics. So the first bucket is getting that data warehouse put together, then it's doing the analytics, and then it's actually creating dashboards that are understandable enough to teachers so that they're not distracted by trying to figure all of this out. Rather than being a help, it becomes a distraction unless you're able to simplify the dashboards and give prescriptive enough information so that they can actually modify the instructional experience.
Thank you, guys. That was perfect. My name is Katherine McKenna. My daughter is a sophomore in public health, and there is a need, I think, for this project to get the undergrad students involved. And my nephew is at USC, and it's a kind of unwritten law that there would be no crime around that area. It's a bad area, but USC does so much for that area, so the bad people tend to avoid, causing trouble there. Any ideas about utilizing the students and advertising that so maybe the bad people in Baltimore understand how much the students support basically rising to the challenge? And maybe your thoughts on how to integrate the undergraduates, especially in public health, to support that and then advertise that so hopefully the crime rate, I'm sure you heard there was a major crime on campus this year, to hopefully prevent that in the future. I'd love some thoughts about that.
So the students in the Krieger School, especially the students in public health, which is one of our very largest majors, are completely involved in the city. They are involved in unbelievable numbers of volunteer projects through the Center for Social Concern, through our summertime internship programs. It's required of them as part of their public health program to be so engaged. Of course, they do this also around the world in Uganda and South Africa. It's really part of the DNA, if you will, of public health to get them engaged. And I do think the community is very well aware of the contributions of Johns Hopkins students. They see them everywhere. If you read my magazine, my beautiful magazine, you see lots of stories about public health students in particular who are engaged. The same thing will be true, by the way, of social policy students who are not so much focused on health but are interested in policy around educational attainment or workforce development or incarceration or pension policies or any of the millions of ways in which government interacts with citizens. Those students are going to be serving in policy agencies and will be very visible both in Baltimore and in the federal government capital. So I think there's endless opportunities, but let me say that one of the things we're hoping that you will help us with as we build the Institute for the American City is both resources to make those kinds of internships possible, especially for the students who don't come from families that can afford to let them not earn money in the summertime. They need your help. If they're going to take up these internships, we need to support them in doing that. We need to open up placements for them. Many of the parents and alumni in our community help us by opening up opportunities for our students to get engaged. So we are very mindful that in every one of these projects that we're doing for the campaign, it needs to work its way all the way down to the undergraduate students and engage them academically, engage them in practical projects that will give them skills and opportunities that will help them find their way in the world, And in the Henderson Hopkins School, David and I were just talking before all of you arrived, you know, we have 5 students. This is the first cohort of Krieger School students who moved into the Henderson Hopkins School and who are working there as fully integrated members of the academic team all day long. And they are essentially fifth-year students who are doing so, getting their master's degrees in the evening, and by the time they finish, they'll be fully qualified teachers who've trained under master teachers. We would love to have more opportunities like that, and we need your help to make that real. I know there's some questions up in the front here, too. Here we go.
This gets his hand, too. They're all over.
I was just curious with the obesity problem with children, what you had found so far in your 2 years of development at the school. How are you managing the children so that they get more exercise or have better meals or whatever, and what had you started to learn from that experience?
Let me turn that over to David.
Yeah, so we have we've done quite a bit in health education and nutrition. We bring in once a week there is a fresh fruit and vegetable truck that comes in that works with parents on not only makes fresh fruits and vegetables affordable, but works with parents on preparation styles that are palatable to the parents and their families. You know, we're trying to figure out what the role food deserts really play in these neighborhoods, and if you go and it's complicated. It's not a simple process. You know, the vendors in the neighborhood, the corner stores in my neighborhood said I would sell fruits and vegetables all day long if somebody buy them. And you know, so the challenge, you know, we're trying to figure out, do food deserts cause obesity, or are eating patterns responsible for creating food deserts? And so we're looking back and forth and have a group in public health thinking about that. It's about the amount of physical activity and space that's available in neighborhoods as well. There aren't safe places to walk and to play in some of these neighborhoods. I've lived in this neighborhood for 2 years. I've never seen a young person in a soccer uniform or a baseball uniform, every now and then a football uniform, but the organized youth activity outside of school is not very prevalent either. So we're working on all of it. It's complicated, and you have to have an integrated approach.
See this article, Food and the City? This is hot off the presses. This is an undergraduate course offered by Adam Scheingate in the Political Science Department. They're studying patterns of food distribution and consumption. So there's a research question in here, as Dean Andrews said, and then there's an action agenda. And the great thing about the Institute for the American City and the presence of this school is that we'll be able to go all the way from one to the other. And if we can answer those questions, where do you get the biggest bang for the intervention? Then we'll be able to not only solve this problem, we hope, in Baltimore, but export our solutions to other cities.
There's one other aspect to it is the relative value of the reward for food in these neighborhoods. It's the cheapest thing you can do to provide comfort and rewards for yourself and your children. You know, so the notion that you have other ways of rewarding yourself and finding pleasure is a really important thing that is often overlooked. I mean, this is the cheapest thing. A bag of potato chips and sitting in front of the television is the cheapest reward system we have available in some of our communities.
Speaking of bang for the buck, when we're talking about bucks, we have to be talking about politics. Is the Institute going to be grappling with the political problems of the city, specifically the structural bias against urban dwellers in cities in our federal system, political movements such as massive voter suppression, which affects urban areas much more than rural areas?
Excellent question. Have you been in social policy lately? So one of the reasons why the Political Science Department is such an important part of the Institute and the social policy program is that these kinds of questions about the expression of citizen discontent, the likelihood of accessing the ballot box, are integral to any kind of solution. If it doesn't have popular support or you can't express it at the ballot box, it's not going to impress anybody who's in power. This is why we are going to be sending our students to Washington. One of the things I discovered when I first became dean that was just almost like a miracle to me is that right off the SICE in Washington, we have a building called the Bernstein Offutt Building. It has, up till now, really just housed one sort of advanced academic program division. It's never been used by the Krieger School for undergraduates at all. But starting in the fall, we are going to be sending our undergraduates to Washington, and they'll be studying abroad in the nation's capital, which, by the way, as you recall, is only about 40 minutes down the road. Right? I mean, it's right there, and we've never really made much use of that, apart from SICE, which is, of course, a very important part of the Washington scene. But for undergraduates, we've done almost nothing. Well, when they're there, we share a wall with Brookings. We're right down the road from the Capitol. The Maryland delegation will be happy to have our students working with them, and they will be working on these kinds of political questions, which do have a great deal to do with whether or not there's voice or exit from the political system. So I appreciate that question.
I think we have time for one more question, and this right here in the middle.
Thank you. I'm Mark David Trachtenberg, class of 1982. My question concerns transportation, especially public transportation. Within the past few years, my cousins David and Susan moved from the Boston area to Toronto for David to take a better job in the financial services industry. However, when they got to Toronto, they found that traffic was horrible and there was virtually no public transportation there.
They can talk to their mayor about that. See what he can do for them.
I suspect we need a more serious-minded mayor to cope with it. But anyway, so my cousin Susan found as a working mother that it was very, very difficult to cope with having to commute for an hour or more between her job and her son's child care center, and they wound up fleeing back to the Boston area. So my question is, what can be done to improve public transportation in, I'm sure there are a lot more North American cities that have a similar situation as Toronto.
Yes, well, Baltimore is one of them. As you all recall from the time you lived there, Baltimore's public transit system is very poorly developed. And it's particularly badly developed for inner city residents who want to access suburban jobs. And a lot of the jobs move to the inner ring suburbs, and it's very hard to get to them on our bus system. So that is a problem that many of these older industrial cities face because they were built for cars. And if you don't have access to one or you can't get a reliable one, it's a very serious problem that affects your workforce readiness and affects your ability to organize your family and all of the child care issues that you mentioned. So what are the potential solutions? Well, this is what we hope the Institute for the American City can look at. What would it cost to incentivize a different kind of bus route system? What kind of bus route system do we need? Is it possible to provide people with subsidies for bus fare that will help them afford the cost of getting to work? Can employers be incentivized to help with it? There are a lot of different potential solutions. Other cities have experimented with them. One of the things we want to do in the Institute is draw those experimental leaders together to compare the best practices that have come out of these efforts in other cities to address exactly this problem. What do we have to learn from the cities that have tried to develop new incentives for bus routes? What do we have to learn from the cities that have developed carpooling? What do we have to learn from the cities and employers that have developed emergency child care systems so that people feel they can actually take a job that's an hour away? That's a big problem if you're a single mom and you don't have a support structure. What am I going to do if my kid gets sick? I mean, I worried about that, and I wasn't a single mom, right? If you're just 20 minutes away, it's still an issue. What if you're an hour and a half away? Well, there are different ways to organize this. On-site child care in the employer's area, on emergency transportation back. There's a body of research that people in my field have developed to try and argue back and forth about different potential solutions. The Institute for the American City will absorb that research, develop experimental interventions, test them to see whether or not they make a difference, and if we can show that they do, try to persuade people to invest in those solutions that will go to scale. Very much like what the Henderson Hopkins School is doing. When David develops these dashboards, the first place in the country to do so, and can show that it's successful, the export process that will send those solutions out to other cities will be something that Johns Hopkins can claim with great pride.
We have run out of time. We will be around for conversation, and we hope that you continue the conversation as we adjourn.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Deans Newman and Andrews. Those were incredible comments and have given us a lot to think about. Really extraordinary. Thank you. Johns Hopkins could not begin to tackle these issues, all of the challenges and opportunities that we've discovered today, without the advocacy and generosity of so many people, individuals like you who share a passion for improving our communities, our school, and our world. Our supporters, whether alumni or parents or friends or former patients, foundations, corporations, they're with us as every mind is brightened, as every discovery is made, and as every life is advanced, helping to fund our most original and our most exciting ideas. Please consider joining our vital work. Help us by providing your insights and ideas, your resources, your financial support. We need your help to further the initiatives that you've heard about today. And tonight, I am pleased to announce that since January of 2010, we have raised $2.25 billion towards our goal, which is 50% of the total, and that is most certainly cause for celebration. More than 162,000 people have contributed so far, which is truly an incredible number. In a campaign called Rising to the Challenge, you might call these people our early risers. And by giving of your time, talent, and treasure, you not only help to drive the important work now underway across Hopkins, you give us the confidence to continue to carry forward this new and ambitious campaign. I ask you to please join me in sharing our Rising to the Challenge story with your fellow Hopkins alumni, friends, and networks. Together with your support, we will rise to the challenges of our times. Our Rising Roadshow continues in January in San Diego, with additional programs planned in New York, Philadelphia, London, and Hong Kong. But first, our work continues right here in Boston. On December 7th, starting at 10:30 a.m., fellow alumni, parents, and friends will be volunteering just 2 miles down the road at Rosie's Place, preparing meals to serve women and children in need. And this is all part of Johns Hopkins in Action, which is a terrific program that aims to put our campaign themes to work within the communities that we serve and of which we are part. And if you would like to participate in this, please talk to a member of the Hopkins staff here tonight. And I hope that tonight's discussion has whetted your appetite for more and that you will keep the dialogue going. In closing, I note that the people of Johns Hopkins never retreat from a challenge. This is who we are. This is the legacy that we inherit and that we carry forward. And it is time, and we are ready to rise to the challenge before us.
Our ideas, our energies, our passion and optimism can contribute so much to the community of which we are part. How we galvanize our intellectual and moral strengths for the betterment of our community and for the betterment of ourselves stands as yet another compelling challenge that we must address. And in rising to this challenge, let us not forget that we are not only of one community, but of many.
We have a wonderful reception awaiting us just outside, where we will be able to continue this conversation. So thank you all for coming tonight. We're so pleased that you're here. and have a good night.